I need my freedom, Stephen. Marguerite stood in our kitchen doorway, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor I'd installed myself 3 summers ago. The morning light streaming through the Lakeside windows caught the diamond bracelet on her wrist, one I'd never seen before. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. 22 years of marriage, and she delivers this bombshell while I'm reading the sports section in my boxers and old flannel shirt. Freedom from what exactly? I asked, setting down the mug with deliberate calm. My voice carried that flat tone I'd perfected during 2 decades of construction work, the one that meant I was listening, processing, but not reacting. Yet. She smoothed her perfectly styled blonde hair, a nervous habit from our dating days. From this, she gestured around our lakeside home with obvious disdain, from feeling trapped in a life that doesn't fit who I've become. Who she'd become. That was rich. The woman who used to help me tile bathrooms and paint trim now wore $1,000 suits to her real estate job and spoke like she'd graduated from Harvard instead of the local community college. I see. I folded the newspaper with precise movements. And what brought this sudden revelation about your trapped existence? Her cheeks flushed pink beneath her foundation. Leonard says I have tremendous potential. He thinks I could run my own agency within 2 years if I focus entirely on my career. Leonard Crane, her boss at Prestige Lakeside Realty, the silver-haired smooth talker who drove a BMW and owned half the waterfront properties in town. I'd met him exactly twice. Both times he'd looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. Leonard says. I repeated the words slowly, tasting their implications. And what else does Leonard say about your tremendous potential? Don't be crude, Stephen. But her blush deepened, confirming what my gut already knew. I stood up, all 6'2" of me unfolding from the breakfast nook. Marguerite took an involuntary step backward. Not from fear, I'd never raised a hand to her in anger, but from the sudden shift in energy between us. How long? The question came out quieter than I'd intended. How long what? Don't insult my intelligence, Marguerite. How long have you been planning your liberation with Leonard's guidance? She lifted her chin in that defiant gesture I used to find charming. 6 months. Maybe 7. 7 months. While I'd been working 60-hour weeks to pay for her spa treatments and shopping trips, she'd been plotting her escape with her boss. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I want the house, she continued, her voice gaining strength. And half of everything else. The business, the accounts, the investments. I've already spoken to Janet Morrison about representation. Janet Morrison. The most ruthless divorce attorney in 3 counties. Marguerite hadn't just been planning, she'd been preparing for war. I walked to the kitchen window and stared out at the lake. Early morning mist still clung to the water's surface, and a lone fisherman sat in his boat near the far shore. Everything looked peaceful, normal, but underneath the calm surface, currents were shifting. You know what, Marguerite? I turned back to face her. You're absolutely right. Her perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. I am? You deserve your freedom. You deserve to discover who you really are without the burden of our marriage holding you back. I smiled, and something in that expression made her take another step toward the door. I'll agree to everything. Everything? Suspicion crept into her voice. The house, the money, the business assets, all of it. I want you to have exactly what you deserve. She studied my face, searching for the trap she sensed but couldn't identify. Just like that? No fight? No lawyers? No drama? Just like that. I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow sip. Life's too short to keep someone who doesn't want to be kept. Relief and confusion warred across her features. She'd prepared for battle and found herself facing unconditional surrender. It threw her off balance, which was exactly where I wanted her. Well, She smoothed her skirt. Good. That's very mature of you, Stephen. I try to be. I raised my mug in a mock toast. To your freedom, Marguerite. May it bring you everything you've been seeking. She lingered in the doorway for another moment, clearly unsettled by my calm acceptance. Then she turned and clicked her way toward the front door, probably heading to Leonard's office to share the good news. I waited until I heard her BMW pull out of the driveway before allowing myself a genuine smile. Marguerite wanted her freedom, and Leonard had promised her a future. I'd agreed to give them exactly what they'd asked for. What they didn't know yet was that freedom and futures came with prices they hadn't calculated. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. The call connected on the second ring. Big Mike's gym. Mike, it's Stephen Ashford. I need to start training again. Stephen? Haven't seen you in here for what, 2 years? What's the occasion? I walked back to the window and watched Marguerite's car disappear around the bend. Let's just say I'm preparing for a new chapter in my life. Fair enough. When do you want to start? This afternoon. And Mike, I'm going to need you to teach me more than just boxing this time. Big Mike's gravelly laugh carried through the phone. Son, after 30 years in this business, I can teach you whatever you need to learn. See you at 3. I ended the call and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The morning sun had burned away the mist, and the lake sparkled like scattered diamonds. The lone fisherman was still out there, patient and methodical, waiting for exactly the right moment to set his hook. Some things were worth the wait. The prestige Lakeside Realty office occupied a prime corner lot downtown, all glass and steel designed to scream success to anyone driving past. I parked my pickup truck, deliberately dusty from the job site, right in front of the main entrance and walked inside. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly straight teeth and an artificially bright smile, looked up from her computer. Her expression shifted slightly when she took in my work boots and faded jeans. Good morning. How can I help you? I'm here to see Leonard Crane. Tell him Stephen Ashford would like a few minutes of his time. Her smile faltered completely. Do you have an appointment, Mr. Ashford? No, but I think he'll want to see me. I settled into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. I'll wait. She picked up her phone and spoke in hushed tones. Through the glass partition, I could see Leonard's office. He was leaning back in his executive chair, gesturing animatedly while talking to someone I couldn't see. Probably Marguerite, sharing the good news about my cooperative attitude. 5 minutes later, Leonard emerged from his office. He'd clearly taken time to straighten his tie and run a hand through his silver hair. The man knew how to make an entrance. Stephen. He extended his hand with practiced charm. What an unexpected pleasure. Marguerite mentioned you might be stopping by. I stood and shook his hand, noting the soft palm and manicured nails. Did she? That was thoughtful of her. Why don't we talk in my office? He gestured toward the glass-walled space. Can Brittany get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine, thanks. Leonard's office was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, framed photos with local politicians, awards from the Chamber of Commerce. The walls were covered with listings for million-dollar lakefront properties. Business was clearly good. Please sit. Leonard settled behind his massive desk. Marguerite tells me you're being very reasonable about the divorce proceedings. I try to be a reasonable man. I chose the chair closest to his desk and leaned back casually. She also mentioned that you've been very supportive during this difficult time. A slight flush colored his cheeks. Marguerite is a valued member of our team. Naturally, I want to see her succeed. Naturally, I let my gaze wander around the office, taking in details. The safe behind his desk, the filing cabinets, the computer that was still logged in and displaying what looked like insurance documents. She mentioned something about running her own agency. Leonard's chest puffed out with pride. Your wife has exceptional talent, Stephen. She's already one of our top producers, and she's only been with us 18 months. With the right backing and mentorship, she could easily establish her own firm. Your backing, I assume? I've been known to invest in promising ventures. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Marguerite and I have discussed several possibilities. I bet they had. Late-night discussions, probably. Strategy sessions that required overnight trips to inspect properties in neighboring towns. That's generous of you, Leonard. I'm sure she appreciates your personal attention. Something flickered in his eyes. Wariness, maybe, or guilt. Marguerite is a professional. Our relationship is strictly business. Of course it is. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. You know, Leonard, I've been in construction for 20 years, built most of the custom homes on the North Shore. You've probably sold a few of them. I'm sure we have. You do excellent work. The thing about construction, I continued, still looking out the window, is that you learn to spot structural weaknesses, foundations that look solid but have cracks underneath, support beams that appear strong but are actually compromised. I turned back to face him. Leonard had gone very still behind his desk. Sometimes the whole building looks perfect from the outside, but one good inspector can spot the problems that'll bring it all down. I'm not sure I follow your meaning, Stephen. I'm sure you don't. I smiled and walked back toward his desk. Tell me about your insurance policies, Leonard. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. My insurance policies? Property insurance specifically. You own quite a few buildings around town. The old Morrison warehouse, the Lakeside Inn, that strip mall on Route 9. Must cost a fortune to insure all that real estate. His hands had started to tremble slightly. That's confidential business information. Of course it is, just like your relationship with Marguerite. I leaned forward and placed both palms flat on his desk. Here's what's going to happen, Leonard. You're going to continue mentoring my wife. You're going to promise her everything she wants, the agency, the backing, the bright future. You're going to make her feel like the most important woman in the world. Stephen, I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding at all. You're going to give Marguerite exactly what you promised her, and in return, I'm going to give both of you exactly what you deserve. I straightened up and headed for the door. Leonard remained frozen behind his desk, his face the color of old newspaper. Oh, and Leonard? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. You might want to review your insurance documentation. Sometimes policies have clauses that people forget about. Clauses that can cause problems if the wrong person starts asking questions. I left him sitting there and walked back through the reception area. Brittany looked up with that same artificial smile, but I was already pushing through the front door. My truck started on the first try, and I pulled away from prestige Lakeside Realty with a sense of deep satisfaction. Leonard Crane thought he was playing a simple game: seduce the wife, steal the assets, move on to the next mark. What he didn't realize was that some games had more players than he'd counted on. I drove straight to Big Mike's gym, ready to start preparing for the rounds ahead. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked embarrassed to be handing them over. Janet Morrison's law firm had wasted no time drawing up the documents. Marguerite wanted everything, just as she'd promised. I spread the papers across my kitchen table and read through them carefully. The house, the business, half the retirement accounts, spousal support for 5 years. She'd even claimed my truck, though I noticed Leonard's influence in that detail. Probably wanted to make sure I looked appropriately defeated. My phone buzzed. Marguerite's name appeared on the screen. Hello, Marguerite. Did you get the papers? Her voice carried a note of anxiety beneath the attempted confidence. Just finished reading them. Very thorough. Janet Morrison earns her reputation. And I'll sign them this afternoon. My lawyer should have everything back to Janet by Friday. Silence stretched across the connection. She'd expected more resistance, more negotiation. The quick capitulation clearly unsettled her. That's good. I'm glad we can keep this civilized. Civilized is my middle name. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. I assume you'll be moving out soon? Leonard found me a beautiful condo downtown. Lakefront view, all the amenities. I'll be out by this weekend. Leonard found her a place. Of course he did. Probably one of his investment properties, conveniently located and perfectly positioned for their continued business relationship. Wonderful. I'll make sure to stay out of your way during the move. Stephen, her voice softened slightly. I want you to know this isn't personal. I just need to follow my own path. I understand completely. We all have to follow our paths, wherever they lead. After she hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen for several minutes. 22 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents and property divisions. But that was fine. Some endings were just beginnings in disguise. I drove downtown to meet with my attorney, Tom Bradley. Tom had handled the legal work for my construction business for 15 years. He was thorough, careful, and completely trustworthy, qualities I was going to need in the months ahead. Stephen, I have to ask, are you sure about this? Tom spread the divorce papers across his conference table. Marguerite is asking for everything. We could fight this, negotiate better terms. I'm sure, Tom. Give her exactly what she wants. The business alone is worth $300,000. Your house is valued at $450,000. You're walking away from over $500,000. Money isn't everything. Tom studied my face with the sharp attention that made him an excellent attorney. What aren't you telling me, Stephen? Nothing that affects these divorce proceedings. Sign the papers, Tom. Let's get Marguerite her freedom as quickly as possible. He shook his head, but reached for his pen. It's your life, Stephen, but I hope you know what you're doing. Trust me, I know exactly what I'm doing. While Tom prepared the signed documents, I walked across the street to the county courthouse. The building was old red brick, built in the 1920s when the town was still a logging center. I'd done restoration work on the interior 5 years ago, updating the electrical and plumbing while preserving the historical character. I found the office I was looking for on the second floor. The nameplate on the door read, County Building Inspector, Robert Hayes. Bob Hayes had been the building inspector for 12 years. We'd worked together on dozens of projects, and he'd always been fair and professional. More importantly, he was meticulous about documentation and had an excellent memory for unusual situations. Stephen, good to see you. Bob looked up from a stack of permit applications. What brings you by? Professional curiosity mostly. I've been wondering about some of the commercial properties around town, specifically whether any have had unusual insurance claims in the past few years. Bob's eyebrows rose. That's an oddly specific question. Any particular reason? Let's just say I'm considering some investments and want to make sure I understand the risks. Well, insurance claims aren't really my department, but I do keep track of properties that have had multiple inspections or structural issues. He pulled out a thick folder. What properties are you curious about? The Morrison Warehouse, the old Lakeside Inn, that strip mall on Route 9. Bob flipped through his files, his expression growing more serious with each page. Interesting choices, Stephen. All 3 of those properties have had significant structural problems in the past 18 months. Water damage, electrical issues, foundation problems. All legitimate? Bob glanced toward his office door, then lowered his voice. Between you and me, some of the damage reports seemed convenient. Problems that would require major insurance payouts, but weren't necessarily consistent with normal wear and tear. Did you file reports about your concerns? I documented everything, of course, but proving insurance fraud isn't my job. That's for investigators and prosecutors to determine. I nodded thoughtfully. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to report suspicious patterns, who would they contact? Hypothetically? Bob pulled out a business card and wrote a phone number on the back. FBI has a white-collar crime unit that handles insurance fraud. Special Agent Dorothy Finch is their lead investigator for this region. Very thorough, very professional. I pocketed the card. Thanks, Bob. This has been very educational. Stephen? He caught my arm as I headed for the door. Be careful. If there really is something going on with those properties, the people involved won't appreciate questions. I appreciate the warning, but sometimes questions need to be asked. I left the courthouse with Bob's business card burning a hole in my pocket. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that was both clearer and more complex than I'd initially imagined. Marguerite wanted her freedom, and Leonard had promised her a future. I'd agreed to give them everything they'd asked for. But freedom and futures had a way of coming with unexpected complications, especially when those complications involved federal investigators. Special Agent Dorothy Finch worked out of a small FBI field office in the state capital, an hour's drive from our Lakeside town. I'd called ahead and arranged a meeting, identifying myself as someone with information about potential insurance fraud. The federal building was all concrete and security checkpoints. Agent Finch met me in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair. She wore a simple black suit and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years dealing with liars and criminals. Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming in. Let's talk in my office. Her office was small and functional, with case files stacked neatly on every surface. A whiteboard covered one wall, filled with names, dates, and connecting lines that suggested ongoing investigations. You mentioned insurance fraud in your call. What specifically brought this to your attention? I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive, sticking to facts and avoiding speculation. I'm going through a divorce. My wife works for Leonard Crane at Prestige Lakeside Realty. During the property settlement discussions, I became curious about some of Mr. Crane's real estate investments. Agent Finch pulled out a notepad. What kind of curiosity? Crane owns several commercial properties that have had significant insurance claims in the past 18 months. The timing and nature of the claims seemed unusual. Unusual how? Water damage that occurred during dry weather, electrical fires in recently upgraded systems, foundation problems in buildings that passed inspection 6 months earlier. She wrote quickly, her pen moving in efficient strokes. Do you have documentation of these claims? No direct documentation, but Bob Hayes at the county building inspector's office has files on all the properties. He expressed similar concerns about the pattern of problems. I know Bob. Good man, very thorough. She looked up from her notepad. Mr. Ashford, I have to ask, what's your motivation here? Divorce proceedings can make people want to cause problems for their spouse's associates. I'd expected this question. Agent Finch, my wife is getting everything in the divorce. The house, the business, the accounts. I've agreed to all her demands. This isn't about revenge or causing problems. Then what is it about? It's about doing the right thing. If Leonard Crane is committing insurance fraud, he's stealing money from companies and driving up premiums for everyone else. That's wrong, regardless of my personal situation. Agent Finch studied my face for a long moment. Tell me more about your wife's relationship with Mr. Crane. She's been working for him for 18 months. He's promised to help her start her own real estate agency. They've become close. How close? Close enough that she's leaving me to pursue opportunities he's offering. I see. She made another note. What do you know about Crane's business operations? Not much directly, but I've built custom homes for several of his clients. He seems to have access to significant capital for investments and development projects, more than his real estate commissions would typically support. Interesting. Agent Finch closed her notepad and leaned back in her chair. Mr. Ashford, what I'm going to tell you doesn't leave this room. We've been looking at Leonard Crane for 6 months. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. Looking at him for what? Insurance fraud, money laundering, possibly tax evasion. The problem is that he's been very careful. We need someone with inside access to his operations. Inside access? Someone who could document his business practices, record conversations, provide evidence of fraudulent activities. She leaned forward. Someone like a spouse of one of his employees. The implications hit me immediately. You want me to use my wife. I want you to help us build a case against a man who's stolen over $2 million from insurance companies in the past 3 years. $2 million. The number hung in the air between us like a challenge. What would that involve? Your wife has access to Crane's office, his files, his computer systems. If she's as close to him as you suggest, she might overhear conversations or see documents that could provide crucial evidence. And if I refuse to cooperate? Agent Finch shrugged. Then we continue our investigation through other means. It might take longer, and we might not be able to build as strong a case, but we'll eventually get him. And if I do cooperate? Then Leonard Crane and anyone helping him will face federal charges for insurance fraud, conspiracy, and whatever else we discover along the way. I thought about Marguerite, probably at Leonard's office right now, planning their future together. She had no idea that her mentor and lover was a federal target. She thought she was building a new life, but she was actually walking into a trap. What do you need from me? Agent Finch smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. Let's start with everything you know about Leonard Crane's properties and business relationships. Then we'll discuss how to document his activities without putting anyone in danger. Anyone except Leonard and his associates. Mr. Ashford, if Leonard Crane is guilty of the crimes we suspect, then he's put himself in danger. We're just making sure justice catches up with him. I spent the next 2 hours providing Agent Finch with everything I knew about Leonard's properties, his business practices, and his relationship with Marguerite. She took detailed notes and asked precise questions that revealed the depth of the FBI's existing investigation. When I finally left the federal building, I felt like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Marguerite wanted her freedom, and Leonard had promised her a future. I'd agreed to give them exactly what they deserved. What they didn't know was that federal agents were now involved in determining what they actually deserved. The drive home gave me time to think about the conversation ahead. Agent Finch had given me a secure phone number and specific instructions for documenting Leonard's activities. She'd also made it clear that once the investigation moved forward, there would be no turning back. Marguerite was about to discover that some freedoms came with prices she'd never imagined paying. The secure phone Agent Finch had given me buzzed at exactly 7 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I'd been expecting the call for 3 weeks, ever since I'd started providing regular updates on Leonard's activities. Mr. Ashford, this is Agent Finch. We need to meet today. Can you be at the federal building by noon? I'll be there. Bring everything you've collected. Today we move to the next phase. The line went quiet, leaving me staring at the phone in my empty kitchen. Marguerite had moved out 2 weeks ago, taking everything except the furniture I'd built by hand. The house felt hollow now, but also peaceful. Like a storm had passed and left clear skies behind. I gathered the documents I'd been collecting, photographs of Leonard's insurance files that Marguerite had unknowingly provided access to, recordings of phone conversations she'd made from our home office, copies of financial records she'd left scattered around during her packing. She'd been so focused on her new life that she'd never noticed my sudden interest in her work. The drive to the federal building gave me time to review everything that had led to this moment. 3 weeks of careful documentation. 3 weeks of watching Marguerite grow more confident about her future with Leonard. 3 weeks of knowing that future was about to collapse. Agent Finch was waiting in the same conference room where we'd first met. This time, she wasn't alone. A man in his 50s sat across from her, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confidence that came with prosecuting federal cases. Mr. Ashford, this is Assistant U.S. Attorney Harold Vance. He'll be handling the prosecution of Leonard Crane and his associates. Harold Vance stood and shook my hand with a firm grip. Agent Finch tells me you've been very helpful with this investigation. I've tried to provide accurate information. More than that. Agent Finch spread my documents across the conference table. These financial records show a clear pattern of fraudulent insurance claims. The recorded conversations include Leonard discussing how to stage property damage. The photographs document falsified inspection reports and forged contractor estimates. Harold Vance picked up one of the recordings and studied the transcript. This conversation from last Tuesday is particularly damaging. Leonard explicitly tells your wife how they're going to claim water damage at the Morrison warehouse, then use the insurance payout to fund her new real estate agency. My chest tightened. My wife is on that recording? She is. Agent Finch's voice was gentle but firm. Mr. Ashford, your wife isn't just Leonard's romantic interest. She's been actively participating in the fraud scheme. Her real estate license gives her access to property records and inspection reports. She's been helping Leonard identify targets and document false claims. The room went quiet while I processed this information. Marguerite wasn't just leaving me for another man, she was leaving me to become a federal criminal. How deep is her involvement? Harold Vance consulted his notes. Deep enough to face conspiracy charges, wire fraud, and money laundering. We're looking at potential sentences of 15 to 20 years for the primary defendants. Primary defendants? Leonard Crane, your wife Marguerite, and 2 other associates who helped stage the property damage. Agent Finch pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. The grand jury issued sealed indictments yesterday morning. Sealed indictments. The words hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been thinking I was just providing information about Leonard, the FBI had been building cases against everyone involved in his operation, including my wife. When do you make the arrests? Tomorrow morning. Coordinated raids at Leonard's office, his home, and your wife's new condo. We'll also be searching the properties where fraudulent claims were filed. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what was about to happen. What do you need from me? Harold Vance leaned forward. We'd like you to testify before the grand jury about how you obtained this evidence. Your testimony will help establish the timeline and confirm the authenticity of the documents. And then? And then Leonard Crane and his associates will face the consequences of their choices. Agent Finch gathered the documents back into neat stacks. Mr. Ashford, I want you to understand something. Your wife made these choices before you ever contacted us. We've been investigating this fraud ring for months. Your information helped us build a stronger case, but Leonard and Marguerite were already on our radar. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to help you understand that you didn't cause this situation. You just helped ensure that justice will be served. I left the federal building with a strange mixture of satisfaction and regret. Marguerite had wanted her freedom, and Leonard had promised her a future. I'd agreed to give them exactly what they deserved. Tomorrow morning, they would discover that what they deserved was a federal indictment and the prospect of decades in prison. The drive home took me past prestige Lakeside Realty. Leonard's BMW was parked in its usual spot, and I could see him through the office windows, gesturing animatedly during what was probably another planning session with Marguerite. They had no idea that federal agents were preparing search warrants and arrest teams. They thought they were building an empire, but they were actually counting down the final hours of their freedom. I drove past without slowing down. Tomorrow would bring its own drama. Tonight, I wanted to sit in my empty house and think about the strange paths that led people toward justice. Some cages, I reflected, really didn't have visible bars. But they were still cages, and tomorrow morning, Leonard and Marguerite would discover exactly how securely they'd locked themselves inside. The phone Agent Finch had given me would ring one more time, probably around noon tomorrow, to confirm that the arrests had been completed. After that, my role in this investigation would be finished. Marguerite would finally have her freedom, the freedom to hire criminal defense attorneys and prepare for federal court appearances. Leonard had promised her a future, and he'd delivered exactly what he'd offered. Just not the future either of them had been expecting.